Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Elvenking, Reader of the Runes, Luna, out April 11th on Reaper Entertainment. This album has 10 tracks, 55 minutes in length, and this is the band's 12th full-length studio album. They are an Italian metal band. Now this album, as you probably know, is the third installment in the trilogy concept of Reader of the Runes. And from an album design standpoint, they did a phenomenal job, as they've done in the previous two records. An album that has the perfect opening song that opens up the book, if you will, is the best starting chapter, considering the style of songs and the way this album moves, and then with a magnificent closing track that really puts a finality to not only the record but to the trilogy itself. So from a construction standpoint and from a theme and concept standpoint, the album is very well organized but very dynamic, very fluid, with a lot of ebbs and flows. It's an album that doesn't repeat itself in its construction, keeping you on the edge of your seat, song in and song out, and I think that's the best way possible to approach a record like this, a concept like this, and making 55 minutes feel a lot shorter than that. Now, once you get into the sound, you're going to find this album to be very versatile. It's an album that doesn't have just one soundscape, or it doesn't have a dominant soundscape, if you will. It's a folk metal at times, it's a symphonic metal at times, it's a power metal album at times, it's a classic 80s heavy metal record at times, and it's also all of the above. So it's an album that has a lot of different faces, it has a lot of different sounds, but the production of the album really enhances the qualities of all of them put together, and it gives also the right emphasis to each and single one of them individually. This makes the album, on one hand, be able to be textured, be able to be layered, but on the other hand, sound and feel really simple, really straightforward, easy to process, easy to understand, easy to follow. Perhaps of the trilogy, this is the easiest to grasp sounding record that they have released. I love the fact that perhaps the most dominant sound, the most dominant force is really classic heavy metal. When you think about Iron Maiden, when you think about Judas Priest, this album has a lot of that in it. And then you see the influences of symphonic metal, the influences of folk metal. You could definitely peel the layers and see that being the overall drive, the overall essence of this album. But all of them contribute with something, not just to the individual songs in which they're a part of, but also to the concept, the storyline, and how this story navigates across all 10 tracks. So a great sounding album, and like I said, the easiest one to listen to, the easiest one to digest. It has this sense of simplicity to it, even though underneath it, it's not that simple after all. And two of the main forces of the sound, it's definitely the guitars and the symphonic elements, for completely different reasons. This is a very guitar-focused sounding record. It's a very guitar-centric sounding album. A lot of that power metal sound, a lot of that classic heavy metal sound, it's really coming through the guitars. The impact that they have, either be in the melodies and the leads, in the harmonies and the solos, all of that really allows you to see the quality of the guitar sound and execution across each and every single song. It doesn't matter what drives that track, what is the influence within that sound. It doesn't matter how epic it is, it doesn't matter how dark it gets. The guitars are definitely the cornerstone of the construction of each and every single song throughout the record, giving this album that more guitar focused, more guitar centric sounding experience. Outside of that, you have the symphonic elements. The symphonic elements on this record don't really drive the songs. I would go as far as to say this is not a very epic sounding, cinematic, theatrical record, considering what I've heard from the band and considering what other bands have done as far as that symphonic influences are to be considered. This record uses the symphonic influences within the sound a lot more to create an atmosphere, a lot more to create a sense of melody, and also to soften up the track itself. So they're not there to create size or to add size to the songs. The songs are actually, most of them, pretty narrow because of that more guitar-focused, guitar-driven sound. But the symphonic elements still play a very important element in order to create more layers, in order to create more texture, but in a simplified way, because like I said, they're not driving the sound, they're just a complement to the sound itself. And then you have the drums playing a role of creating a foundation, making the songs feel more robust, giving the songs a little bit more thickness, but not necessarily heaviness. This is not a heavy record all around. It's just a very driven album, and sometimes in that drive and that push, there is some heaviness to it, but the heaviness is there by consequence of the drive, not because of it. So it's a very important album from this perspective because it really sets itself apart within the trilogy, and it's an album that has its own DNA, its own sound, its own dynamics, its own fingerprint. Now, once you get into the vocals, the vocal performance there's a lot of layers throughout this record as far as the vocals are concerned, but that also plays into the concept of the album, into the storytelling aspect, and it also gives the vocals a little bit more size at times so that everything doesn't feel very narrow and very thin. It's important in songs that sometimes don't have that sort of thickness sonically to have some of that vocally, but the vocal performance is phenomenal, really matching the style, the sound, the experience. What are you getting out of these songs? More folky tracks move into a more folky style delivery, becomes more storytelling, more narrator. Power metal driven songs become a little bit more impetuous, if you will. So it's a vocal performance that doesn't have one size fits all. It really adapts itself to the style of the song, to where you are within the story, to where you are within the record, but never completely losing track of what the vocals on an Elvenking record has always been. So when I look at all of these elements, this, out of the trilogy, this is definitely the most accessible record. This is the most perhaps straightforward album, the one that's easier to grasp, easier to get into. You honestly don't have to dive super deep into this album in order to get the most out of it. It's an album that's very accessible to all of those that decide to press play on it. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Stormcarrier. This song features Matthias Lillmans from Fintroll on vocals, and that creates such a great dynamic. It creates a duet, basically. This is a duet style track with those really heavy, harsh vocals, then with the more clean vocals on the other side, creating this really yin and yang dynamic between the two, suiting the song extremely well. Musically, the symphonic side of the track works really well as the backdrop to the more classic heavy metal sound, and this creates a slightly more epic experience because this is one of the most epic songs, not just from how it sounds, but also how the vocals come together in that style of duet. So it's a track that blends a lot of influences, but creates a lot of dynamic movement within itself from a vocal standpoint and from a musical standpoint. Then we have The Ghosting. This track definitely has a little bit of a darker, somber atmosphere to it. I would go as far as to say this track has a little bit of a goth experience in its sound. And you're going to hear that not just in the guitar sound, but in the overall sound that the track has. It almost sounds at times like an 80s heavy metal, hard rock, arena style track, because it has size, but it doesn't have thickness within the size, it just has size. And then that goth experience that comes from the overall darkness that the track has works really well as well, because it works musically, but it also vocally. It's a track that has a more of a symphonic presence in the chorus, so the chorus becomes a lot bigger, it opens up a lot more, and then you have the verses being a little bit more contained, but still with that goth, dark influence behind them. Great track all around. Last but definitely not least, The Weeping. This is a ballad. In my opinion, this is a symphonic folk ballad. It has all of those natural attributes of a ballad, and it has a lot of folkiness in it, not necessarily in the forefront, but definitely as one of the layers of the overall melody of the track, and it has a lot of symphonic elements. When you put those two together, folk elements, symphonic elements, into a more ballad style track, you're able to create a very thin veil, but a thin veil that covers quite a bit. So that's the style of track you have here. It has size and the atmosphere that it creates, but it's this very thin veil that expands that atmosphere throughout the song, placing still a huge focus on the guitar sound, creating at times a theatrical, cinematic experience. The verses very haunting, and then the chorus a lot more bombastic. But definitely the ballad for me of this record. This is it, Elvenking with Reader of the Runes, Luna, out once again April 11th on Reaper Entertainment. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section. I'll see you all at the next video. Take care, guys.